So here's a fun tidbit. I'm not only a massive film nerd, but a history nerd too. So today, we're going to review the historical movie Enemy at the Gates. The movie covers the famous Battle of Stalingrad and the real-life Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev. Seeing as this is a historical movie, first off, some context. In summer 1941, Germany controlled almost all of Europe, with only England opposing them. Their only potential rival was the USSR, and so, in June 1941, Germany launches Operation Barbarossa and invades Russia. And while the Russian casualties are horrific and the Germans manage to get within 30 kilometers from Moscow before being pushed back, Russia, despite having almost half of its population occupied, was still very much in the war. Seeing as a quick victory was no longer possible, in 1942 the Germans attacked the Caucasus in order to seize its oil supply and turn the war of attrition against the Russians. However, this creates a problem as it threatens to overstretch their lines, and so, in order to protect from a Russian counterattack, the German Sixth Army under von Paulus is ordered to secure the Don-Volga line. The most crucial point on this line is the city of Stalingrad, where, due to the Germans not being able to encircle it, a vicious meat grinder begins between the Russians and the Germans. And so, the Great Battle of Stalingrad begins, a battle that will decide the outcome of the biggest war in human history. The story centers around our protagonist, Vasily Zaitsev, a Russian peasant conscripted to fight in Stalingrad. There, he soon reveals that he is a great sniper, becoming friends with political commissar Danilov. Danilov then proceeds to turn Zaitsev into a propaganda hero, using his ever-increasing number of kills. Becoming aware of him, the Germans send their own great sniper, Major Koenig, who begins to engage in a battle of wits with Zaitsev, until, at the end of the movie, Danilov sacrifices himself in order to expose Koenig's position, leading to Zaitsev killing Koenig. While this sounds fairly simple, the movie is actually over 2 hours long, mainly because it adds a completely useless subplot. More exactly, a love triangle. Wait, what's happening? Basically, the story adds another character called Tanya, for whom both Zaitsev and Danilov fall in love. This eventually results, after a lot of will they won't they, to Tanya going with Zaitsev and Danilov becoming depressed, renouncing the communist cause and sacrificing himself at the end of the movie. And for the love of me, I don't know why this was added in. You could just as well keep Danilov as the fanatic and have him sacrifice himself out of patriotism and friendship when him and Zaitsev get into a tight spot. But besides the fairly annoying padding, the movie is actually pretty good, at least just as a movie. The acting is very good, though Ed Harris's role is probably the only one who shines out. The technical details, like the sets, are also pretty good, and the story works pretty well despite the padding. But where things get interesting is in the way Enemy at the Gates depicts its history. The first thing one should note is that the bulk of the story is pretty clearly fiction. Historical fiction with real characters, but fiction nonetheless. Basically, there is no record of Koenig ever existing outside Soviet propaganda that claims there was some super sniper that Zaitsev killed. But even then, the name of said super sniper varies from propaganda piece to propaganda piece. Zaitsev did exist and was indeed a very successful sniper, primarily serving at Stalingrad, but most of the story is complete fiction. However, this doesn't mean the history isn't still important. Saving Private Ryan's main story is almost completely made up, yet it's still one of the best and most relevant historical movies out there. So how does Enemy at the Gates treat its history? Well, let's say it's a bit of a mixed bag. It has a generally fairly good representation of Stalingrad, but a very flawed one. So let's get into it, shall we? As it happens, the beginning of the movie is where the most horrendous historical mistakes take place. The very first sequence, when the Russians cross the Volga to get into Stalingrad, is actually really realistic and well done. The next part, however...
The one with the rifle, shoot! One out of two gets a rifle. The one without follows him. When the one with the rifle gets killed, the one who is following picks up the rifle and shoots!
Where to begin on with this one? How on earth could this happen in Stalingrad when the Russians were able to produce 50,000 pieces of a single type of plane and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of tanks? But you're saying that they couldn't arm their men? Are you high, movie? Like, this is not only mocking the Russian army, but the German army too, by suggesting that the Wehrmacht could only win against unarmed farm boys, and even then lose in the end. This is false on so many levels, and it's not even open to arguments. We have in-depth access at the Soviet bureaucracy at the time, and we can clearly see how many guns were produced, where they took them, and to whom did they give them. But what's worse is that many people actually believe this myth, mainly because of this movie. And it's so stupid. In reality, the Russians were not only well armed at Stalingrad, at least as far as rifles and small arms were concerned, but their guns were far better than the German ones, to the point that the Germans were fighting to get capture Russian small machine guns. But moving on, hopefully it's getting better from now on. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. So let's be clear. Did the Russians do this kind of thing? Yes, they did, but only during Barbarossa, and even then, only when in the chaos the NKVD were left to do their own thing. In fact, by December 41, Zhukov had expressly given an executive order outlawing all such suicide attacks. So the movie clearly takes some liberties with the history, mainly in indulging in the common myths about the Red Army. Fortunately for my sanity, after this the movie does get better. For example, the representation of the unclear borders and the crater-ridden hellhole that was Stalingrad is actually very good, so go movie. Also, it's nice that it mentions a lot of the tactics actually used by Zaitsev, like planting dummy snipers. Another good thing is the depiction of communism in this movie. The movie has a very good and very healthy approach, not glorifying communism, as it's so easy to do when speaking of World War II. Sure, between them and the ideology we shall not name on YouTube, communism is probably the better alternative, especially during World War II, though not by far. This is shown by the fact that the soldiers don't seem particularly ideologically inclined. In fact, they seem kind of cynical in regards to their state. The one thing that does unite them, however, is patriotism, which everybody did have. It's called the Great Patriotic War for a reason. The driving engine behind the Red Army wasn't communism, but rather patriotism. So all in all, this movie seems to go very well, except the beginning. Surely nothing incredibly controversial, both historically and morally speaking, is going to happen.
Sasha has the Major convinced he's gone over to the other side. I don't need to tell you the risks he's taking.
Well, crap. So yeah, for those who don't know, the movie's most controversial moment isn't the rifle or mass assault thing. It's the fact that Danilov and Zaitsev employed the help of a child called Sasha in order to spy on the Germans. Inevitably, he is discovered and how shall I put this in order not to get demonetized? He's treated in the normal fashion for spies. What I really like about this is that there is no one bad guy. Sure, Koenig was the one to do the thing, but the Russians were the ones putting the child up to it and using him to spy on the Germans. So there is no clear black or white in the regard. And I like this. It takes a very heavy and dark subject and approaches it very maturely and thoroughly. So as controversial as this moment is, I really feel like it adds something of worth, and it does make the movie actually stand out. So, to wrap this all out, this is a surprisingly good historical movie, despite the occasionally bloated plot and the historical stupid at the beginning. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. I'm constantly trying to improve the quality of this channel, so if you have any suggestions, please leave them down in the comments. All feedback, be it positive or negative, will be more than welcome. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.